2019. The first order of business is the following public hearing item. It's a petition of Jamerson Real Estate Incorporated to rezone approximately 273 thousandths of an acre at 1221 Lockwood Drive from R1 Low Density Residential District to R3 Medium Density Residential District to allow the construction of a duplex.
Remember the Planning Commission, the property is currently zoned R3, which is this dark gold portion here, and the remainder being zoned R1, single family. The property's recommendations on the future land use map mirrors the zoning for medium density uses and low density residential uses. The proposal is to rezone approximately 8/100ths of an acre, which would allow the construction of one additional duplex beyond what the existing zoning would allow now. It's a strip of about 18 feet fronting on Lockwood Drive, extending back approximately 195 feet. The remainder of 1221 Lockwood Drive would be joined with 1225 Lockwood, the adjacent parcel, that would create a large 1 acre lot that would be developed for single family. We think this is a very reasonable request and are recommending approval of the rezoning.
Great, thank you. And who is here to speak on behalf of the petition? If you could please sign your name and then state your name and tell what you have.
I'm Bill Jamerson, representing Jamerson Real Estate. And of course, it's stated pretty well in what Tom just says. By doing this allows for the construction of this additional duplex. One thing that's not on there, and I think maybe just as important, what you see now, and I'm not sure, and I'm reading it all, Tom, that's lot 1 and 2 combined right there, is that right? The residue of lot 1 and 2, the big lot?
This, yes.
Yeah, okay. Lot 1, which is the closest lot there, has a drainage channel that's been there for ages, and it's worked very well. And for us to build on lot 1, we'd have to do very much work to that drainage channel. So by doing this, rezoning this little strip, we can do a very nice home and probably not have to disturb that drainage channel at all, if at all, not very much. So I think that's probably one of the nice considerations because that helps that. But otherwise, it's pretty clean cut. What it says is exactly right. It allows for another one. This is just a 19-foot strip of land. So unless you have questions for me, that's all I have.
Do we have any questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Jamerson. We might call you up again.
Okay.
Is there anybody in the audience who wants to speak in favor of this petition? Okay, anybody opposed? They can speak. Okay, then the public hearing is closed. We can discuss it.
I'll just say I was extremely confused by this thing. All right, so the whole, back to the one that has the red line around it and the yellow and the tan, show what the zoning is. That one, well, that one will do.
So this is the existing zone.
Yeah.
And if you look at 12, this is, the red line shows the existing 1221.
Okay.
So,
And it's the whole 1221 that's, well,
No.
part of 1221 will get.
an 18-foot strip of 1221 is what's being requested to be rezoned.
Wait a minute. I thought you were going the other way. I
No,
thought
right here.
the little teeny strip at the bottom that's dark yellow now, that's
No,
already
this
R3.
is already R3.
It's
They're
the top
requesting to
strip.
zone an 18-foot strip of this light yellow.
18 feet top to
Right.
bottom on that.
So
Okay.
that would allow for an additional
Okay.
duplex. Then the residue of 1221 would be combined with 1225 to make a 1 acre lot.
Where is the 18, I'm sorry I'm so dense, but where is the 18-foot strip? The part that's already dark yellow?
No.
You don't have that drawn in.
Okay.
It's not showing.
So what they're asking to do is, you see that line right there? The gray line?
Yeah.
That's about what it would be, an 18-foot strip right there.
Okay, like 2 alleys wide or something, or not even.
Not even an alley wide, right there.
Okay.
So that would
it's just
allow an additional duplex.
Okay.
Then what's left would be combined with 1225 to make one big R1 lot.
All right. I was trying to think it was that bottom yellow part or else the top light.
No, this is already R3.
It's just somewhere in between those two, there's a little strip.
Just right here
Got it.
is what they're asking to rezone.
Okay. No,
So the total impact is reduced by the fact that you're now getting a much larger residue lot.
On 1225.
That's still zone R1.
Correct.
Yeah.
okay. Thank you. It would have been clearer if you had put a circle around that strip, because that just, no.
Well, here's the strip. Right there.
Oh,
Okay, I see where,
But no, that sticks out into,
No, all right, see this little
Okay.
jog right here? In the property line?
yeah.
All right, so if we go back and we zoom in, that's the little jog right there. It's just oriented differently.
Well, that gray line just looks like the other gray lines around everything else. I couldn't tell that was the subject property, but you're saying that basically the width of that gray line is what we're talking about.
Approximately.
1221 isn't a perfect rectangle. It's got a little.
Correct.
They're just cutting the part that sticks out.
No, not the whole
Enjoining it.
part, not the whole part. It's just a
Yeah.
little
Yeah, they're just
slice in
they're
between.
joining that piece with the rest of it and leave one big lot at 1221.
Okay. I think
So they
that-
would subdivide this. So they would take 18 feet, they're asking to rezone 18 feet. That would be combined with this existing yellow,
Mhm.
which would allow for an additional duplex. The remainder of the light yellow would be combined with 1225 for a large 1-acre single-family lot.
Why do 1202 and 1200 need that 18 feet when they look the same length as 1204? Are they not as deep as 1204?
Well, the duplex would front on Lockwood.
Okay.
So these are actually larger than they need to be.
But yes, 1200 and 1202 are not as deep as 1204
Yes. Well, yes, that's exactly right.
because the red line
They
on the back
stop
of
here.
those is is the property
Oh,
line
they stop
between.
there.
Yeah, that's
Right.
where the property line
They
is.
stop right there.
And
Well, so are you going to?
the zoning's just
So
skewing.
they're going to get the rest of the dark yellow plus the little tiny strip that's gray now that I can't see, right?
Right.
Okay, fine. And it's really just the strip in gray that we're talking
Correct.
about. Okay, thank you. Got it.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Seems to be a common sense use
Seems
of
reasonable.
the land.
Yeah, and again, to me, you're gaining a duplex, you're giving up one single-family residential, so the overall impact.
we're not even giving up one residential. I went there, my biggest concern was, the people live on down there, they all have single-family units. We're going to start allowing duplexes to go on down the rest of that road there until you hit single-family units. Because you all the way go down the rest of Lockwood Road, they're all single-family dwellings.
I agree that I'm concerned about Wood Road. We've already talked about Wood Road for a long time, and did we deny that one? I know council, I know something else is being built in spite of us or council, but the rest of that is already zoned for duplexes, so if we're just talking about 18 feet, I can't quibble
Also,
about that.
yeah, they're building, they built several new single-family homes in the empty lots. That was a field a couple of years ago, just a field, and there's new homes, there's a couple more lots for sale. Yeah.
Still R1.
So I think
It's
there's a
just my
few-
concern that we're not going to be saying, okay, well, we got this section is now R3. No, well, we can do the next one over as well, and we do it in
Yeah.
increments. I just want to make sure we're not going to start that path of encroaching on the R1 zone. Well, we got that little 18 feet, let's go get the next acre.
Right.
I thought about that. I just saw the for sale sign, and one of the builders has that lot for sale, and I don't think he's gonna want to build a duplex if he's selling it as a single-family lot, so. I thought about that as well.
Across the road, you're like, they didn't buy in there to be across the duplex.
That's right.
Well, no, I agree with your concerns. I think one precedent is that if people aren't coming and saying we're also combining remaining lots into one bigger lot, we've got a precedent set saying this is one reason why we were in favor of this happening. Because I don't see combination of lots occurring that often.
Yes, I mean, 18 feet is like,
Yeah.
okay.
Right. I think if Tom, can we look at the map, the satellite view? I think a lot of those lots with numbers at the top and come down, there's already several houses, single-family houses through there. So I feel like it's already starting to kind of create its own buffer.
And I think right there where that, when you come across where that 18-foot strip is, the first R1 single dwelling house is, if we make that the cutoff for Lockwood Drive going on down, I'm comfortable.
Well, any other comments? Somebody want to make a motion?
Move to accept the proposal as stated.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Well, that passes. Thank you for bringing that, and look forward to see how it goes in city council. Have a good day.
Good day.
Okay, our second order of business, the next order of business is a continuation of a discussion that we had in the last meeting regarding short-term rentals. And this is not a public hearing, so we can actually call people from the, from you all, the crowd, if have something we think might add, but we're here to discuss and kind of continue hashing out a lot of the ideas that have been brought to us. And we've also gotten continue to get emails. So just to kind of give you that notice first. So, where do we go here?
Members of the Planning Commission, a little bit of background. Currently, the zoning ordinance does not define short-term rentals, and you'll see STR throughout this presentation. That's abbreviation for short-term rental. Currently, our zoning administrator has interpreted that short-term rentals are permitted by right in the city's business districts and in owner-occupied residential properties, subject to our current occupancy standards, which is no more than 3 unrelated individuals. As you know, we've presented to you that there's over 300 or right around 365 short-term rental listings identified within the city of Lynchburg. And those short-term rental listings have increased by 37% between 2016 and 2017. And if the national average of over 800% increase follows suit in Lynchburg, they're only due to increase more in the coming years. On October 23rd of last year, Council directed staff to prepare the amendments that would allow short-term rentals in the city, and that's what got us to you. As Commissioner Rogers stated, on January 23rd, the Planning Commission did conduct a public hearing, closed that public hearing, and directed staff to come back for a work session to discuss each aspect of the draft ordinance in greater detail. So the purpose of the ordinance is to clarify that short-term rentals are in fact a permitted use subject to development standards. The ordinance would require owner occupancy in the RC district, R1, R2, and R3 districts. Owner occupancy would not be required in the R4 and our commercial districts and the institutional districts. Also in the RC through the R3 district, The buildings would be required to maintain the appearance of a single household. Right now, the ordinance is written as a maximum number of occupants could not exceed 3 individuals. One short-term rental would require an additional parking space. There would be an annual registration fee of $150, a penalty of $500 if the owner or host fails to register. All the requirements of the Uniform Statewide Building Code would have to be met, and 3 violations related to the short-term rental could result in the revocation of the approval. So to get into this, you have heard quite a bit from both sides. The sides that obviously support short-term rentals, and you've gotten a lot of emails from people that do not. So the first question that I think the commission needs to ask itself is, should the city allow short-term rentals, period, in the city of Lynchburg? A primary goal of the city's comprehensive plan is to improve the livability of the city's neighborhoods through conservation, stabilization, and revitalization. So with that, my role today is really to try and act as a facilitator or a moderator for the discussion between the commission, Director White, our zoning administrator, and Mitch Knuckles, who probably know way more about short-term rentals than I do or want to know. So I'm going to ask them to come up to the table if they would. But I think the first question you need to ask yourself as a commission, is this a use that we should be allowing in the city of Lynchburg? Period. Let's not get into districts yet, or occupancy, just is this the type of use that should be allowed in the city of Lynchburg?
I think so.
Yeah, I did, done a lot of reading, and there really is, there aren't, I mean, I only could find one locality that actually said that they weren't allowable. And I think that the trends of the Airbnbs and the short-term rentals are such that we have to allow them with some restrictions.
Yep, I agree. I have no problem with them, and I think if we didn't want them, the negative publicity would be really big. And I don't even know about the legality of prohibiting them.
Well, that's exactly right.
But I support them regardless.
Yeah.
One of the things I think is nice about having them is, in these times when there are no available hotel rooms, people who attend an event here like a graduation will spend a lot of their money outside of the city. So my thought is, if you have them, that's actually revenue that can be captured by people staying in town.
Mm-hmm.
So when I've stayed in a bed and breakfast, I've stayed in town, I haven't gone elsewhere. Stay somewhere close by, and then you can actually take advantage of the businesses that are close by, as opposed to going to a hotel in Roanoke. I think it's kind of a competition, a good competitive advantage if you have a nice stock. But then the question is, what if you have too many? If we get, I think one of the things that's a concern is, people buying several houses and saying, I'm just going to Airbnb these 3 houses. And then it becomes a problem. That's why I think the regulation is really important.
And that's a whole nother
It's a
question,
business.
right?
Yeah, right now, I just want the commission to consider whether or not this is an appropriate use to have within the city. And
I would say
it
yes.
sounds like,
Yeah.
I'm the only one that has spoken.
right, so,
You only want what?
Has not spoken yet. I think inherently as a homeowner, they have the right to use their property as an Airbnb. And therefore, I am support of allowing Airbnbs within the city of Lynchburg. But I think we do have to have some restrictions.
well, so it sounds like the consensus of the commission is yes, it is a use that the city should allow, which means we're going to be here a lot longer than it should.
I didn't say that earlier.
So the next point of discussion is, what is a short-term rental? The draft ordinance defines it as the accessory or secondary use of a residential dwelling unit or portion thereof by a host to provide room or space that is intended to be occupied for a period of fewer than 30 consecutive days. So what the commission should discuss right now is the 30-day window appropriate. And after you consider the 30-day window, should there be a limitation on the number of days a year? So is 30 days appropriate? Should it be shorter or should it be longer?
When we went to the workshop a week or so ago, Michael told us that the state legislature is considering, well, they might vote on 180 days statewide. Is he talking about 180 days for one person to stay in the place, or 180 days maximum that anybody?
180 days that a house can be used as an Airbnb per
Okay.
year.
All right, so that's not pertinent to this question.
And the way the ordinance is written, there would be no limitation on the number of days. It's just you'd have to do it in less than 30-day increments. So you could rent it for 29, let it be vacant for a day, and then rent it for 29, vacant, 29. That's the way it's written right now.
So let me ask you this. Let's say if you have somebody who has an Airbnb on the, on the platform, and then they get a call and it's a traveling, let's say, nurse. They're here 8 weeks, they stay there 8 weeks. Does it just then revert to a regular rent and there's no issues at all with it?
That's correct, yeah. So if they're staying there longer than 30 days,
The long term,
it's considered, a normal rental. At that point, it's not transient.
right?
And so what happens, then do you have to inspect apartments? You do inspect apartments that are rented, right? If you know that someplace,
If there's a,
or,
Well, we'll only investigate these based upon complaints that we get. So currently how we're doing it, is complaint basis. So, but there is, you talked about inspecting apartments. The city does have a rental inspection program in certain areas of the city that are inspected on a regular basis for building code requirements, life safety type stuff.
just certain areas of the city?
Yes.
It's where our oldest housing is, our greatest concentrations of converted single-family homes are, that sort of thing. And it's specifically enabled by state code for those areas.
So when I think of the spirit of a short-term rental, whether for pleasure or for work, I never think of 30 days. And so potentially they could stay 30 days, move to another one for 30 days, or leave for a day and come back for another 30 days. That to me starts moving into the long-term, at least spirit of things. I just can't, I've never been on a business or a pleasure trip in my life that was 30 days long.
in my reading, I felt most of the localities did use 30 days as their definition of a short-term rental. I think, in my opinion, that this is just, we have to come up with this particular fact to separate the short-term from the long-term. So if we're going to come up with a day, I feel that 30 days is appropriate. I just think if you start getting into 15 days or 10 days, you know what I mean? I don't know. I feel like 30 days kind of on the average is probably inappropriate.
I think we have to make it 29 days, 30 days or more is long-term rent. So it has to be like 29 days or less.
Right.
I agree that I think 30 days is adequate. If somebody really wants to stay longer, yes, they can go away for a day and come back. But Dave, to answer your question of why somebody might want more, I know that sometimes, for instance, Centra Health has doctors who come to town and they want to stay somewhere for until they can find a house to buy. And they may be looking for something they might, it might take them 2 months to find it, but they don't want to stay in a hotel. They'd rather stay perhaps closer to where they work, or I've had somebody ask me about that.
Okay. That's a good point.
If I might, this typically isn't an issue in the city. If somebody's staying there longer than 30 days and it happens to be an Airbnb, I think probably actually neighbors would welcome that, because it's a more longer-term resident that's staying in there. This is rarely something that comes up, that some people are concerned that people are staying there longer than what they should be.
And then if I could, I know nobody wants to talk about the tax code, but the Virginia tax code defines transient as 30 days or less.
Okay.
So it would comply with the tax code,
All right, well,
just to throw that out there.
that's good. Convince all those arguments.
So is there consensus that 30 days, less than 30 days is acceptable? Okay. Check. All right, so should there be a limit on the number of days in the city? Right now, there is not.
But Richmond is going to or has, correct?
Fairfax County.
Fairfax has, and not to muddy the waters, and we really don't need to get into it, is that there is, I believe there's a hearing getting ready to occur in about 2 minutes that would take that away from them to be able to limit it.
Because theirs is 90.
That's correct.
Right. But the state, I thought the state's 180 would trump that anyway.
Fairfax has 60.
That's the proposed amendment. It would take it to 180. So that's what
Right.
that's what the proposal, that's what the committee's hearing today.
So if they vote in favor, that's decided for us.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So if we choose less, we might get trumped in about an hour.
That could be,
Sure.
but I think in the spirit of things, we should choose perhaps less than 180. That just seems like an awful lot. I wish Commissioner Light were here today, because he's the one who said, he wanted it to be 10 people and they should be able to stay for a long time, because he goes on vacation for 2 or 3, 4 weeks. And I wonder how he'd like it if his next door neighbor was renting out his house for 180 days a year.
I've talked to quite a few people, and most people, that's not I'm not seeing the scenario where they have a house rented nearly that much in a year. We had the one person who spoke and said she'd rented her house 4 or 5 times, a room, and that happens to be my neighbor, and so you see people come and go, but it isn't I think if it's an ongoing business concern, like a bed and breakfast, it's a little bit different. People might do that, but that 180 seems like excessive, like no one would ever exceed that anyway. So
So do you think we should make it less than 180?
that's what we have to.
I know, but what do you
Decide.
think?
So right now, there is nothing.
Right.
Right.
I know, but if
It's
we're
a
just trying to,
framework
I
around
think
it
we
is-
should come up with
Yeah.
a limit.
If you rented it every weekend of the year, 2 days, you'd have 104 days. You're never going to rent it every weekend. You might rent it for 3-day weekends. I think for somebody to run up on 60 would be unusual. And then how would we know if they did?
But if the state votes for 180, it's going to be 180, right? And that's what
That's what they're comfortable. You can still set your limit and just know that if the state sets something else, then we would just have to modify the.
Right. What do you think?
I think having an ultimate limit makes sense, just like having 30 days consecutive
Right.
makes sense. And I think it's similar to what you guys have pointed out and Kevin pointed out. It's not going to be a huge issue, but it's still worth having it in there to cover all of our bases. What that number is,
Well, I'll throw a number out there in view that possible doctor looking for a house. I thought 90 days. And I think we want to pencil that in. So when the state comes back with 180,
Was that in any of the wording, 90 days? I've seen that in some of the other, I think maybe Stanton had it, yeah.
And was there a reason why?
You can help me, but probably enforcement, knowing, tracking it.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't limit it right now with the zoning officials' present interpretation. We don't set that limit, so this is your chance to kind of
Well,
hear the.
I've never supported not doing something because we can't enforce it.
Right.
I still think if we think it's right, we should have it in the ordinance.
It, just realize, and I mean, we just like to get this out on the public record, that we believe we will be well equipped to figure out where these are located. It will be much harder to know how many times guests are staying, you know, what the rates are, those sorts of things. So that's more difficult information to come by.
So I'm just inclined to go a little bit more towards what the state is, you know, so, I mean, I might throw 120,
I was thinking a third of a year,
yeah.
which would be kind of in between 90 and 180.
I can live with 120 as well.
Yeah.
Hmm?
I mean, it's
I
a
can live with 120 as well.
broader.
You can live with 120? I like 90 myself, but I don't care.
Yeah, no,
I-
it's not, none of this is a deal breaker for me.
So it sounds like you've got consensus at
I
120.
think 120 would be.
Very good. Okay, so let's just talk about the zoning districts in the city a little bit. So our RC Conservation District is very low-intensity development. Think it's a lot of your floodplains, may have some single-family homes, but they're required to be on 10-acre lots. Okay, so large lots. These are typically areas without water or sewer availability. Large lots, all right? R1 is what you typically think of with your single-family neighborhoods. These are single household dwellings on 15,000 square foot lots. All right? So, now, I'm getting ahead of myself, but in the R1 district, if it is owner occupied, you can have an accessory unit. And we'll get into that a little bit more. Now, where people start getting confused is the R2 district is also single household. The main difference between an R1 and an R2 is the lot size. The lot size are a little smaller at 10,000 square feet. Still single household. Still, if it's owner occupied, you can have an accessory dwelling unit. R3 is where you get into allowing single households or duplexes, like you just talked about on your last petition. Townhomes are permitted by CUP, so the densities are getting greater. You need 4,000 square foot per residential unit, per dwelling unit. So smaller lots even than R1 and R2. R4, these are your high-density residential areas. These are your apartments. Single households, duplexes, and townhomes are still permitted, but you only need 2,000 square foot per dwelling unit. So, density's going up as you go up in the R1 through R4. Now, let's talk about our commercial districts. B1 is a limited business district. This is typically offices, smaller scale retail. The max floor plate is 50,000 square feet. Restaurants and service uses. Single household is still permitted by right in these districts, or residential uses as part of a mixed use development. So it's not just a carte blanche, you can do residential uses in the commercial district. B3, you're getting more intense. Office, retail, restaurants, wider ranges of commercial uses. Drive-in, think, more auto-oriented. Single household is still permitted. and residential as part of mixed-use development is permitted by right. Notice you can't just go in and build townhomes or apartments by right in the business districts. You would have to get special approval to do that. But if it's mixed use, part of a commercial development, you could do it by right. Before urban commercial, think downtown. Wide range of commercial and residential uses are permitted by right. Not really any lot size requirements, not any setback requirements, there's no parking requirements, so think density, urban development, density. B5, this is the most intense business district in terms of use, so it gets bigger even than the B3, but you're also getting things like garages and many storage warehouses, those types of things. So think really intense retail. Residential uses as part of a mixed use are by right. Single-family dwellings are not permitted by right anymore in this district. And the thought was, at the time, council, when this changed, council wanted to try and preserve the commercial districts for use as commercial development instead of it being used as residential development, standalone. And then you get into your institutional districts. These, the only one we have, well, we have a couple now. We have Westminster Canterbury and we have Liberty University. Is Westminster I-1?
I-1.
I-1. So just Liberty University, big university. These are things like your schools, colleges, universities. Residential uses operated by the institution are allowed by right. All right. So the question for you, you've heard about the different districts. Should short-term rental be allowed in the districts indicated? Let's not talk about homeowner occupancy or anything like that. Are those districts, which is essentially everything except our industrial district and the IN1 district, all right, should short-term rentals be permitted? So you've already said they're okay in the city. Now we're talking about the different types of districts that they should be permitted in.
I'll lead off. I would say they could be permitted. That's the way I would lean. Yeah, from R1 up. I think that that's the idea. The Airbnb, you're in neighborhoods, so all kinds of neighborhoods, not just areas with a lot of apartments or downtown mixed-use areas. So that would be my leaning, but. Like I'm again, there's the number issues that would come up because I think that's where you start building the framework around it. But if we all said no, it shouldn't be, then like Tom would say, I guess it would be a shorter day.
I think there's just we've had emails and concerns about putting it in an R1, but there's such a fine line, I think, between R1 and R2, just lot size. Is it, right? And if you're R1, your neighbor might be R2, but I mean, if you're on the edge, I'm just looking at where these are, and the R1s are generally off the main roads, except some parts of Rivermont Avenue are. And then the RC district, you'd think, oh, well, maybe we should exclude them there, but, and there are not that many homes in RC districts. But I think I know of one, and if that person wanted to have an Airbnb there, it'd be a lovely place to go. It'd probably be very expensive. I don't think, they'd be renting thousands of, hundreds of times a year by any means, but.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've heard from people is the idea that, number one, it's hard to exclude R1 and R2 if you have somebody in R2, say along Rivermont, but then several blocks off in an R1 area that's a very similar place, almost the same, that there could be a difference there. But also, there's people who rent properties in those same neighborhoods and have very little care about who's in the house. So, in some arguments are, this is actually better than me having to rent my house out because I have to leave, I can't afford or something like that. But,
That's actually a really good point. If you can rent in all of these categories, then I don't see why we would limit short-term rentals.
I agree.
Do we have a feel for the 365 identified units, what the breakdown is across these categories?
We do not at this
I
point.
mean, even
We
just mainly
had-
residential, mainly,
One of the things that once planning commission and ultimately council acts on this, one of our recommendations is that we would use the fees to hire an assessment
Yep.
service. We really just got a snapshot at times, so we can show you an image that's got the dots all over the place, but it's not at a scale where you can break it by district.
okay, thanks.
Sure.
So Tom, rentals are allowed in each one of those districts.
Yeah, you can
I just want to get that out officially.
correct.
And
What-
if we're allowing rentals, then I don't see
So
why.
you can have rentals in those districts, no problem. Our next discussion will be about how many rentals. you
Sure,
can
then that's where it's going to start getting.
Right.
But at this point, with this question, if we're allowing rentals in all these districts, then I would support short-term rentals in all
Okay.
these districts.
So it sounds like there's consensus that it should be in these districts.
Yes.
And also, you can rent your house out and leave it.
Absolutely.
In all these districts. So you can buy 10 houses to use for rental property in
Absolutely.
R1 through B.
Absolutely.
Which leads us into the.
Okay, moving on. So, currently, the zoning ordinance requires owner occupancy in the R1 and the R2 district to allow an accessory unit. And it must contain the appearance of a single household dwelling. So, to get an accessory unit, you have to have owner occupancy in the R1 and R2 districts. You could rent it, right? But you could rent the whole house, but if you want that second accessory unit, which I have a picture later on that was professionally drawn. So the question right now is, should the owner have to be present in the RC, R1, R2, and R3 districts in order to use the house or the dwelling as a short-term rental?
And that's the biggest, I think that's one of the biggest hangups that I've heard from people. That and then maximum number of people, I think, are the two things that are really difficult. I know, but I'm just saying this is one of them. And, I think that if you say this, I think you'd limit, it's almost naturally cutting people out of that opportunity. And I think that's a problem. And I think Cham, it is a shame he's not here because he weighed pretty heavily on his experience of staying in Airbnbs, not wanting the owner there, not because you don't like the owner, but actually that's not a thing that a lot of people do. They rent a house for a weekend. So that's where I've gotten a lot of the feedback myself. I don't know about you all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're limiting a property owner's rights by telling them that they need to be there in order to rent it. I don't think
But if that's the case, we're doing that here.
that's right. So
Right, if we
I don't
limit
like
it.
that.
Right.
So I'm kind of inclined to say that it shouldn't be required. But I also don't think that in an R1, and I don't know how we would regulate this, but you certainly wouldn't want, two separate units in one home. You know what I mean? Where, it's a property in an R1 and they might have a basement apartment, a house, and an apartment above their garage. I mean, you wouldn't want necessarily like 3 units being rented out at the same, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like as 3 separate units or as 3 separate possibilities.
Are we already limited for long-term rentals to, in how many units you can rent out in one?
You are.
One property.
So in the single-family districts, it has to be, if you're going to rent, or if you're going to rent and live there, you're only allowed to rent the one. If you don't live there, you can only rent the house that's there. You can't rent an additional, cottage or something that's behind it.
So
or
that's
anything.
R1 and R2.
It's R1 and R2.
Only.
R3, would allow, it doesn't require that owner occupancy. And so, yeah, they could potentially do a duplex and rent out both units without living there.
So
But- Oh, sorry.
what I think might make it easier is, even though I don't want to do it, I'm going to get out of order, and let's go to the number of people first, because I think it'll help you in your discussion on this.
Can I ask one question? I think with having these 2 questions, they're actually very different. One is actually basically saying, can you actually have a duplex almost? And the other is saying, does the owner have to be there? So if you have a duplex, the owner is actually still technically there at the house, even if you have a separate entrance. So I think it's almost like having 2 different questions there.
Well, yes and no, but let's go to the other questions and you'll see why, okay? So, somebody remind me to come back to this. All right, so,
People forget.
all right, so let's look at what the zoning ordinance defines related people as, because this is very important in our current occupancy standards. We spent a great amount of time when the zoning ordinance was written, and actually throughout the years, talking about occupancy standards. Related people is defined as related individuals include people who are related by blood, are married to each other, or are in a substantially similar relationship, and children under their care. Okay? No more than 3 unrelated individuals may occupy a dwelling unit. Anywhere in the city, no more than 3 unrelated individuals can occupy a dwelling unit. Doesn't matter if it's R1, doesn't matter if it's R4, doesn't matter if it's B4. No more than 3 unrelated people. That's probably some of the complaints you get throughout the years, the number of unrelated people living in a dwelling unit. Think college students, all right? So our ordinance says today no more than 3 unrelated people can be in a dwelling unit, okay? Now, in the owner occupied, okay, if you own your house and you're upstairs, you can have your family. So all these little people are related. See, they look alike. And then you got this guy that doesn't look alike. He's not related to him, so you can have related plus 1 in this unit. Since it's owner occupied, say in your basement, you get an accessory unit and you can have no more than 3 unrelated people in it. Or you could have related down here, but no more than 3 unrelated. Now, the ordinance says today that if you do this, it can't look any different than a single family home. So you can't put 2 doors side by side and make it look like a duplex. It has to look like a single family home. Okay? If this is your house and you move out of it and you're just going to rent it, all you can do is put related or 3 unrelated individuals in it. You guys understand?
So not 3 couples.
Not 3 couples. Not 10 couples.
Brothers and sisters somehow, but anyway. You probably could.
Right. So yeah, this is today, long-term rentals, this is how it is, no more than 3 unrelated. And to get the accessory unit in the R1 and R2 districts, it has to be owner occupied. So, let's go back to this question.
I would recommend that we stick with what we have for, well, I don't know about the number, the 3, but as far as, owner occupancy, no. Sorry, I'll shut up.
No, I mean, so if you go back to this, should owner occupancy be required in the RC, R1, R2, and R3 district?
I think in our last meeting that we discussed this, one of the things you cautioned us about was with the Airbnbs, by not having owner-occupied Airbnbs, we could run the risk of having Airbnb deserts, where you could have a whole street being Airbnbs.
You did hear that, yes, you did.
But if you have enough restriction around time, there isn't a value for it.
I understand that.
So,
But also, it would preclude people having multiple Airbnbs. They could have 2 Airbnbs at the same time. But they'd have to spend the night,
Right.
People should shuffle them back.
but they have to physically live there if it's going to be within the intent and spirit of the law.
So what this requirement would say is that people that may want to go out and buy multiple houses in a single-family district and convert them solely to be used as short-term rentals, they could not do that.
I would cut it off at owner occupancy should be required in RC, R1, R2, and R3, which is medium density and has a little different, it has a different rule for the long-term rentals as well, right?
That's
You
correct.
can,
So what was the logic for not being consistent with long-term rentals for R3?
I didn't recommend.
Up to now, everything being proposed is
Weird day.
consistent with the zoning ordinance.
Mhm.
Now we're saying R3 would not be
I'm not
consistent.
looking at an accessory unit.
You want me to?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I understand it, and I'll answer for Kev.
it's
Tell me if you're wrong.
That's the difference in R3.
You had an analysis done by GIS,
Mm-hmm.
and the majority of the structures in the R3 district were actually single-family dwelling.
That's right.
You remember that?
Correct.
They were not duplexes. The majority of them were single.
Yeah, I think it's close to
Household.
80%, I think, of dwellings in R3 existing are single-family
In reality,
homes.
R3 is really an R2 in practice.
But, lot sizes are smaller in the R3. A lot of times, they're much smaller than what would be required in R2. So you're getting the density of houses being closer together. It's just a lot of them are, in older neighborhoods where it was, the houses were traditionally built as single-family.
But in R3, you can rent out 2 units in a single house in R3, correct?
Yes,
You don't have to live in there.
assuming it has the living facilities to do that, 2 kitchens.
You can have 2
and-
apartments in a single R3 zoned house.
Correct.
If I'm in R2 and I have 2 apartments, I can't leave my house and rent out both of them. I have to live in one. So that's the difference. In R3, you can rent out multiple units without living there. And that's where I think the difference would be in this. I think the owner has to be there in R1, R2, RC, but
So then,
not so sure in R3.
so if we say yes, that the owner occupancy is required, that means that a significant number of people will break the law by renting their house, because that's what most people, I think, are doing, kind of owner occupant, and then they leave on the weekend and let someone rent the house out. So the idea that some people have is, I'm going to have my house, for example, at graduation. I'm going to rent my house out. But I can't be there if a family's coming in for graduation, one family. So I think that makes it a little bit, you know, you almost have to enter a separate platform.
So I think what the commission needs to discuss is what does owner occupancy do? Okay? In the R1, let's take R3 out of it. Okay, let's just say in the R1 and R2 district, what would requiring owner occupancy in the R1 and R2 district do? So, one, the majority of the people that we have heard from that are opposed to it because of noise, trash, traffic, parking all over the place. They don't feel safe in their neighborhoods anymore because they have people coming asking where the key is and this and that. And then you talked about the Airbnb deserts, right? You could potentially create neighborhoods that are nothing but houses that have been purchased and they're only used for short-term rentals periodically, right? So if you require the owner occupancy, you know, somebody's going to more than likely be there to clean the yard up and deal with the traffic, and you know, the neighbors are going to feel safer because they actually know who live there, and somebody's going to be living there, so you're not going to create these deserts anymore. I'm not saying that that's the correct thing to do. I'm saying that's the thought behind it.
I think we need to distinguish too between owner occupancy and owner being there. That's a big hurdle for me, because if it's graduation weekend at LU and I know that I can rent my whole house out for a bucket of money if I just, you know, went to see my sister that weekend or something like that, that is different from me not living in the house at all.
Right.
And renting it out as much as I can. I'll be back on Monday and I'll find the trash in the yard, and you know,
It's still your home.
It's still
Right.
my home, and I still have my neighbors, and I still have to see them every other day of the year except that weekend that I took off to my sister's and let somebody else have it, which I could do if I wanted to just let some friends to have my house for a week. You know, I could do that.
that's a
Money
great- that's a
needs to
good-
change hands, but it's, I have a little bit of a problem between, you know, owner occupancy I would like, and it's certainly an RC, R1, R2, R3, I'm on the fence about, but as far as the owner having to be there, other than running to the store for milk, which is the example we used last time, that I'm not so sure about.
Let's think of it.
Okay.
29 days at a time, the owner wouldn't have to be there.
No, that's true. We're not talking about a week.
But if they did that, they only have like 3 times they can do it over the year.
That's true.
So it's still, there's a limit, maybe like primary and secondary residence. You know, the wording is so, it's so broad that it, like I said, I think it would really limit what people can do.
If it's my primary residence, somebody's going to get sick of me coming to see them for 29 days, I know. So more than likely, I'm not going to do that too often and leave my house. If I'm going to be doing this Airbnb, it's because I've got a couple of extra bedrooms that I don't mind, you know, somebody using while I'm there, and, you know, they can come and go. It's not when I'm not there. I'd be afraid to leave my house and all my stuff to somebody. So I think the owner occupancy, if it's okay with you to leave all your stuff in your house and they've got free reign of your house for 3 days or 29 days, I don't think too many people are going to do that. I think they're going to want to be there most of the time, but I don't think it should be required that they're there all the time.
So if this was part of the ordinance, and at what point would you be in violation if you leave town for the night? still your home, are you violating the ordinance?
Yeah, I think so.
So I could never travel if someone's in my house.
Probably. I mean, I don't think it's that, we talked about it last time, and I think a trip to the grocery store or something like that is probably okay, but I think you have to stay there overnight, to really occupy the dwelling, so to speak. And certainly we're not going out there with a stopwatch, counting how long that you're there during the day, but I think the owner would have to stay overnight.
But with the long-term rental, owner occupancy, people leave all the time for trips.
Correct. But you may not have the transient nature that you would with short-term rental, where you have, potentially multiple times out of the month, there's different people living in the dwelling.
But they're not getting in trouble for leaving. If I have a long-term rental and I'm the occupant and I leave for a week to go on a trip,
That's correct.
I'm the owner.
And you have an apartment in your house.
Technically, I'm violating.
No, not if you're
No,
long-term.
no, not if you're long-term.
Not if you're
Oh.
if you're renting it for a
You
year,
rent your basement.
you're fine. You can come and go all you want. But they have their own apartment.
Yeah.
They're not sharing your home, which most of these things, if you're renting a couple of rooms out and you're living there, you're not renting your whole house to them.
And the difference is a transient type occupancy.
Right.
If somebody lives in your basement long-term, they've moved in, the moving trucks came, neighbors are starting to recognize them, they probably know each other. Transient, you can have different people showing up every 29 days, or every 2 days, or every 1 day. That's the discussion point.
As much, I completely understand the logic behind making R1, R2, R3 owner occupied. I understand that, and I get that, but I still struggle with limiting a property owner's rights of being able to rent out a home. And we're, there are people out there that have rental houses and rental properties, and they rent them out, and
That's not going to change.
right, but what we're saying is that you're not allowed to rent it out for less than 30 days anymore. So, John Smith right now might own 3 houses in the city of Lynchburg that he doesn't live in. He's an investor. He's bought these properties, and he rents them out, as a short-term rental for less than 30 days. And by passing this, all of a sudden we're saying you're not allowed to do that anymore. So then he owns 3 properties that, I guess he could.
Convert them to long-term rentals.
Yeah, he could.
And,
And
and
31-day rentals, and then they're long-term rentals.
And it would push the people who want to do that, they can still buy in R4, possibly R3 if we change that. And, at least they could do R4 and Bs and all the others, all the B districts. But
There are, a lot of people that have, I'm sure we all know people that have rental properties that do this Airbnb, and they don't live there. That's not their personal residence.
how does it affect the neighborhood? How does it, if it were the house next door to you, and somebody bought that and wanted to turn it into an Airbnb, and so you no longer had a neighbor next door that you knew you could go borrow a cup of sugar from. You instead had somebody, you don't know who's going to be there. How would you like it?
No, I understand the cons. I do. I get the negatives. I get that.
So I kind of think in R1, R2, people have an expectation that they're going to know their neighbors for more than 30 days. That they bought in a residential district. In R3, it's a little different, just because you've got 2 units, but still, it's residential. R4 is residential for that matter, so It's just higher density.
So let me ask you this, let's say if we say, okay, let's restrict it, and we all agree on R1 and R2. So all the people then who currently have them, they're grandfathered in, right? They get to actually continue doing, kind of like how the old duplexes were before they were zoning, that as long as you keep the 2 units in use, that they can still maintain that use. So then can we say, well, if you're already doing it, you're grandfathered in? I know of houses in R1s that actually have basement apartments and they've had them for 30 years and they're like, as long as they're continuously occupied, they still pass. So,
It's a good question, but I don't think so. I think with the adoption of the ordinance, they're gonna have to meet the code.
Remember, we're working off of an interpretation
Yeah,
right now.
yeah.
We don't have an
right.
ordinance.
Right.
We haven't done all the other fun parts of the code.
But what do you say to those people that have purchased homes for, just to rent them out for a week? I mean, I just rented a house, for an Airbnb, through an Airbnb for a week for my family, and it's a rental. It's purely a rental.
But we don't know how many people are purchasing these homes with the idea of long-term rentals versus the short-term rental. If you own 3 homes, your profits may be more in the long-term side of things.
The house
But
you
I-
just, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Was it?
No, it wasn't
you
a
don't-
neighborhood.
It wasn't in a neighborhood. I've been in lots of Airbnbs, 6 or 8 anyway. Loved them. They were all wonderful. They were some in big cities, some in smaller cities, but, I don't know how they were zoned, but they were, I'm sure, well, I assume they were legal. But they weren't in neighborhoods. There weren't families around and kids playing and, people talking over the fence so much. They were, the place you want to be when you want to be able to walk downtown or, be in a city.
Mr. Johnson,
Yeah, so to answer your question, there would be a grace period. So if an ordinance gets adopted, by city council, there would be notices sent out. If you recall, Tom or Kent, I think, had mentioned a contract with Host Compliance, which is a group that's going to sort of monitor the use of Airbnb in the city and kind of provide the city a list. So we'll have an active list of those folks that are actively using the short-term rental platforms. They'll be mailed a notice saying, here's the date that this ordinance is going to become effective. It probably would be about a 3-month period of time or so that they would have. That may not help your concerns, but there's a little bit of leeway in there for people to correct.
and council would ultimately set that time frame, whatever the
And they could
effective date.
convert to long-term rental
Or,
and be okay.
or bed and
So-
breakfast, right? I mean, they could actually go through the rezoning process, conditional use, and do a bed and breakfast, and then they'll
Absolutely.
have to worry about ownership.
There are
if they're there.
options. They're not just
Right.
being, you're done.
Do we know how long a lead time, how far in advance can you book an Airbnb? Can you book one 6 months out, or, is 3 months the
I see,
limit?
yes.
Because-
I think even further than that. I think you
Okay.
can book pretty well in
So-
advance, almost 12 months, I think.
We might have to give a longer grace period for, because people already have bookings. I know they could back out. Obviously, if the house burned down, they'd have to.
Staff can make a recommendation on that, or if you feel strongly about it, we can
Yeah, I
take
just
your
want
recommendation.
to look at that.
Sure.
I don't know what it is.
And all these points are here because staff supports them
Yes.
originally.
Right.
Not that you're not open to
Right.
discussions, but
So in our conversations with council, we've explained how we are currently enforcing the interpretation. That is what council has heard. They have directed us to come to you through the public hearing process, allow you to get the feedback, and make your recommendations. Our intent is still to carry forward a staff recommendation that looks a lot like what we brought to you, that says, here's how we're doing it, and then show your recommendations for changes and let council consider that.
Just a little story story. I know of 2 Airbnbs in my neighborhood, 2 short-term rentals, probably Airbnb most of the time. And one is owner-occupied and the other one's not. The one that is owner-occupied is just a couple doors away. And, you know, it's always very nice. We know the people who live there, and they're all, you know, sometimes we're even there when the people come, and they introduce them as their guest, you know, Nancy, this is my guest, you know, these are our guests, they'll be staying here for a few nights, and, you know, everything's fine. They're all nice people, never have any problem with any of that. I've never seen a problem. The other house, I've never seen a problem, but I've been by there when there was it's, as I say, not owner occupied. They rent the whole house, and there was clearly a wedding party with, you know, a couple of Ubers out front and 15 girls coming out to get in the cars to go to, you know, rehearsal dinner or something like that. And it didn't bother me. I enjoyed watching the whole thing, but I didn't live next door to it, and I didn't have to clean up after them when they left. It wasn't my problem. I didn't go by the next day to see if there was trash in the yard, which I doubt. But I do know that when you have houses that you can rent out as Airbnbs and you don't live there, obviously you've got to come by, or you send somebody there to change the sheets and clean the house after each time, so somebody goes. But, and if they make too much of a mess, you're not going to want to do it much. But I do know that things like when you rent it out for a big football game or, you know, reunions and parties, people can make a huge mess, and they can make a lot of noise. They can drink a lot of alcohol and cause trouble at night. And that is not something I would want in my R1 neighborhood, to have next door to me a house that is not owner occupied. If I live there and people start making noise because I'm renting out 3 rooms, I'm going to either grin and bear it, or if they're making too much, I'm going to go tell them to quiet down, you know, before the neighbors call the police. So I think the owner occupancy makes it, you know, makes it less of a problem. I think it should be required, certainly R1, R2, maybe R3. Because even if I go away for the night, my neighbors are going to let me know the next day if there was a problem there. And I probably would be hesitant to go away for a night. If I'm renting the whole house to a big group of people, I know they're going to make a mess. So I'm probably not going to do it.
I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, but if you do that, then you're taking single-family homes really off of the short-term rental market. I mean, because, I mean,
No.
then why
so
even?
You can live
because,
there.
Well, no, I mean, who has, I mean, if you're going to rent a home to a group of people, more than likely, you're not going to stay there. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, if somebody wants to rent a house as a short-term rental, it to me, you're just taking out single-family homes from the short-term rental market by doing this.
Would removing the R3 make it more palatable in terms of the R1 type neighborhood versus, even though R3, you said, is mainly single-family residential,
It allows duplexes.
it allows,
More bulk.
it allows, I mean, again, if we were going to suggest this, it's still hard for me to move away from what's in place in the zoning ordinance for long-term. If R3 is not in this category, long-term, I just think we need to be consistent with both.
I think I would lean towards saying that I would be much more comfortable if said primary residence required in R1 and R2. Not meaning you have to be there, but you know, if it is your primary residence, I know what you're talking about. I wouldn't want anybody renting a house beside me. I was reading Blacksburg's recommendations, so I've kind of read through theirs, and they have the owner occupant, that window where you can actually have it non-owner occupied, and there's a reason. But I think if it is your primary residence, you're going to be really careful about letting people know they're not going to have a big party there. And I think that might be something that would be a little bit more, I'd be a little bit more comfortable with in considering the R1 and R2 and requiring that to be in those two, not occupants, not being there though all the time during that rental. That's just my thought.
If you look on page 59 of the draft ordinance, F1, the way it's written is property shall be owner occupied and the owner shall be present while a property is used as a short-term rental.
Right.
So what I'm hearing you state is that you would strike owner shall be present while a property is used as a short-term rental.
It's me.
That's you.
Right.
That's me too.
So, well, that's two, but also, so let's go back to the R3 piece. Is there any consensus on dropping R3 from the requirement?
I don't think it would be bad to drop it from the
I'm
requirement.
fine with dropping
I think
it for consistency's sake.
It would give a
So
little,
that R3 does not have to be owner
Right.
occupied.
Correct.
It would not be
It
part
does
of
not have
this.
to be a primary
It's
residence.
the same as long-term.
right.
I can live with dropping R3, but I'm sorry, I think we have to have an occupancy in both RC, R1, and R2.
You mean
Okay.
owner being present
Yes.
all the time,
Yes.
except to go.
There needs to be someone responsible
Okay,
for the home.
so let's take the R3 piece first. Commissioner Johnson?
I know, I mean, I want to agree with you guys, I do, but I mean, I'm good with taking R3 out of that, out of being owner
That's getting
occupied.
closer to what I think you
Right.
would like anyway.
So, yes, I'm good with that.
All right, so dropping R3. Now, does the owner have to be there in RC, R1? Well, first, does it have to be their primary residence, which means it's owner occupied?
I
I
say
think
yes.
In those, yeah.
Everybody said yes except Commissioner
Kenzie?
Pearl.
I didn't say yes either.
No, Kenzie.
But, I mean, if,
Dave?
No, I would say yes.
Dave says yes.
yeah,
Right,
I mean,
so
I
I said
can I
yes.
just be the odd man out?
Yeah.
Yeah. I just, I can't.
Well, then you're not developing it by consensus. If you can't live with it, you don't have consensus. If you want to vote on it, we'll do it that way.
I think the thing about RC, which if you don't have that, it actually just becomes a venue. And then you really should have a business license and get zoning for a business venue at that point. Then it's like a park. That's what it could become, you know? It's occupied a third of the year. That's why I was thinking that.
It's got
Well, the
to be a
RC isn't it?
primary residence.
No, I said if you didn't have it as a primary residence, it would actually be the one that would be most likely used the most frequently.
Well, then you can make it a B&B. You can get a business
Yeah.
license and make it a B&B if you're going to do that.
Yeah, and I don't think, I haven't heard from anybody that has like RC type.
Is it a problem to send to council? We're not in consensus? We do that with petitions all the time.
Or would you would really like for us to be, wouldn't you?
What goes to council from you is coming as a commission.
Yeah.
If 3 of you agree that it should be owner occupied, and 2 of you don't, the commission still says owner occupied, okay? What I was trying to do was to get you guys to do consensus where you might not like it, but you could live with it, all right? So that would be the best case scenario. What we need to do is move forward. So if Commissioner Johnson is saying, I can't live with that, then the entire commission is just going to have to say, if the majority says, yes, that's what we want to do, then that's what we're going to do. Sorry, Commissioner Johnson, but it's...
So I think it's overly restrictive to require owner there all the time. You know, that's kind of my,
I think the owner is going to restrict themselves to either be there. Yeah, well, I don't think we're having too much trouble with that. Kenzie's
What's-
problem is making it their primary residence.
yeah, so that, I think the primary residence is what's important, not the occupancy.
yeah.
Because if it's their primary residence, they're going to be much more careful with it. So that's kind of the middle ground, I think,
Yeah.
is the primary residence.
So does everybody but Commissioner Johnson to agree on that? That should be the primary residence?
I'm just kidding.
We're in primary residence.
Yeah.
Well, that's the same thing as owner occupancy, right?
Right. Yeah, you're striking out the must be present. That was the thing we're striking
I
out.
haven't striking it out yet. but
Well,
I'm
Well, that
trying to
would,
get the first part
yeah, that's
first.
what I'm, yeah.
Yes.
Everybody, you can say no.
Yeah, no.
Okay. All right, so owner occupancy in RC, R1, and R2. Does the owner have to be present while it's being used as a short-term rental?
I think that was the spirit of this when it started, and so I say yes.
Yes?
Do they have to be present for
Present.
long term?
Mm.
No.
I'm a no.
So, I'm gonna say no as well. I'm still,
They don't have to be present. 1 yes, 2 no's. All right, so they don't have to be owner. Owner does not have to be present.
I think they're gonna self-police this, because if this were something that they bought as an investment to rent out as Airbnbs, they're gonna have beach furniture, or, they're gonna have the minimal furniture that you
You
put
got it.
in a condo that you rent out. They're not gonna have all of their valuables and all of their heirlooms and stuff in there. But when you live there, then you've got to trust the people who come in to see your stuff. And you're not going to want to be gone for days.
Kent, you good? All right. Should the principal structure use a common entrance so that it retains the appearance of a single household residence in the RC, R1, and R2?
Yes.
Yes.
Correct. I hope somebody else is taking notes, because I never can read my own handwriting most of the day. Okay. All right, so we went over related people, and we went over my little stick figures. All right, and remember, the ordinance today says you can have no more than 3 unrelated people in a residence. All right? Should it be limited to no more than 3 individuals? So let's talk about that. So Commissioner Light said, well, if me and another couple go, that really wouldn't be permitted.
He said that we have couples,
Oh, he said
Yeah,
5
no,
couples.
I mean, and
Yeah,
that's-
in a large
Well, he said
house.
up to 10.
Renting a house, yeah.
I just think the trend of the short-term rental is to be, it isn't necessarily a family or just a couple using it. The trend is certainly, friends
house
and
and
girl
3 couples.
weekends and,
Right.
correct. So I have a problem with the 3,
Right.
with the 3 unrelated.
Yeah, I do too. I think, like what, not that I would say we should do everything in Blacksburg does, but they have 6, which for a short-term rental seems to be, it's not 10, but it's not 3.
So my question to you on that is, if you want to go beyond what normal occupancy standards are, everywhere in the city of Lynchburg, why would you consider that? Long-term, wait a minute, long-term, you can have no more than 3 unrelated people, but you can come in for 29 days and have 6 people? That makes sense?
Right.
Can I answer
It's a problem, but
that?
Well, absolutely, it's your meeting. I'm just,
Well, you asked the question, I just want to tell you why I think 6. It's probably going to be, as you said, 3 couples. It could be 6 girls or 6 guys or 3, 6, whatever. I don't care what they are. But, or babies. But if I'm back to the owner-occupied R1, R2, because I happen to live in one of those districts. But if I have 3 extra bedrooms and 6 people, and I wanted to be renting this out as Airbnb, I need to have my head examined, but I could theoretically rent it out to 6 people, 3 couples. And I'm gonna make sure they don't cause any problem. They're not gonna have wild parties while I'm there. Now, okay, we've got a house in R3, that's a little different, but they're only gonna probably rent it. If you're gonna have 6 people come, they're probably gonna rent it for a weekend, a long weekend, maybe a week. But they're coming, why they're coming to Lynchburg is for events. They're coming for weddings, they're coming for graduation and homecoming and family reunions. They're not normally, unless they're somebody who's just got a job here and is looking for a new home and wants to stay in a home while he's looking, that's different. But when you got, 3 couples, they can't stand each other much longer than 3 or 4 days, probably, or a week. They're, where was I going? If they're in my home, I will police them. If I have an R3 that I am renting out full-time as Airbnb, and I've got facilities for like 3 bedrooms, I would think, have to have a number of bedrooms if you're gonna have a certain number of people.
I wonder if we could do like, 3 unrelated or a maximum of 2 per bedroom with a cap of a certain number, like 6. So you could actually but they are short-term rentals, and if we're having this new overlay, and it's competing with hotels, and that's one of the issues, I'm sure. Hotels, you can have 4 in a room without a problem. There's no, and you might pay a little bit more, but there's no difference in the fire code or anything like that. So it makes sense to me, if it's a short-term rental, to be able to have some fluctuation with that number.
So, I understand, and I think where staff maybe had gotten to was 4. I think the question you need to ask yourselves is okay, if we set it at 4 or 5 or 6 for short-term rentals, when John Doe comes in and says, well, hey, you're letting R1 and R2 districts and everybody else have up to 6 people in this unit for up to 29 days at the time. Why can't I do that long term? So you're going against every occupancy standard in the city of Lynchburg, right, in the residential districts. What you're essentially doing here is you're taking your single-family districts and turning them into hotels. And if you're comfortable with that, that's fine. But that's not what the comprehensive plan says that you want to do. So I'm not sure you really want to increase the number of unrelated people up to this huge number in your single-family neighborhoods. I just want you to understand what you're talking about doing and understand it, because that's what's going to happen.
We've already voted to make our single family districts into hotels. I mean, we've already agreed to that.
But
It's
you
just
really
the
haven't-
number of people now.
You've voted to well, you've said that you could rent them short-term. You haven't increased the occupancy yet
Right.
above what would normally be allowed. And now you're talking about increasing the occupancy above what would normally be allowed for up to 29 days at the time, 120 days a year.
I can tell you, well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I agree completely with those concerns. When we redid the zoning ordinance, this was the biggest issue by far from the public. And if we're now going to say in an R1 neighborhood, open the door, I'm still arguing consistency and sticking with 3 unrelated, even for short term.
So would you consider that over certain districts like the R1 and R2, and then a different number in the R3? Kind of having the same, kind of putting a framework around several districts like we've started to do, it seems like.
Where does it shift in the zoning?
We had a RC.
It doesn't.
It doesn't, right. So no, I'm saying being consistent with the zoning, and it doesn't shift.
R3 lets you have 2 apartments in a house that you
No,
rent
they're
out the
separate.
whole.
They're separate
separate.
dwelling
They are
units.
separate dwelling
They're
units.
connected, but they're
Right.
separate.
Right.
They got their own.
It's still 3
kitchen.
unrelated per dwelling.
Right.
It's the dwelling
units.
that changes.
But you can have 2 units in a.
So I'm fine. I mean, I agree, I share those same concerns, and I'm fine sticking with 3 unrelated. I mean.
And you can have a family of 5. That's actually comes and
Well,
stays in the house.
Right now, it's written as 3 individuals. I think what you're talking about is mirroring the
Yeah.
zoning language today that says no more than 3 unrelated.
Which makes, I think that makes more
Yep.
sense, because then you could still.
Have a family.
You don't want to have you don't have a party of.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could have a family of 5.
Oh, yeah.
Correct.
You could actually have 2 families of 5.
No.
I would like to distinguish between individuals
And I thought that too.
and, okay, if I rent an apartment to 3 people, full-time for a year, they're students. I'm renting it to these 3 guys, and I have some experience with this, and it's all bad. But anyway, I rent this apartment to 3 guys for a year, or 2 years, or 3 years, or however long they're in school. And they're not 3 people living there, there are 6 people living there, because they all get girlfriends, and they all come spend the night much of the time. I don't know how many people are living in it. I no longer do that because of that. But with Airbnb, or with short-term rentals, if you limit it to maximum of 3 bodies in this, or 3 or 6 or 4 or whatever you're talking about, that's the occupancy limit of this. Now, when you rent an apartment to somebody, you can't say, you can't have your girlfriend come over. You can't do that. You can say, yeah, there can't be but 3 guys living here, but you can't say, but you guys can never have a girlfriend come spend the night. Don't think you could do that, but because it just happens, whether you say it or not. So I think there's a difference in renting an apartment to 3 people and renting an Airbnb if you have 3 bedrooms to 3 couples. Also, if there are 3 married couples, there's 3 unmarried couples, you're going to get into that.
Don't get into that.
And then if you have 3 individuals and they each are married, you see, do you have 6 unrelated people, or do you have 3 unrelated units?
Maybe they rent Airbnbs beside each other. And
Then you get a whole village of Airbnbs.
Could you have 2 couples?
That's 4.
if they were brother and sister and they were all related, yes, but no.
So, but if there's 2 married couples, they're related by marriage. Like, there's 2 couples that are married.
It goes to
They
the
filed
exam-
together.
It goes to the example he has up there of when you have a relation there, you only get +1. So if you have a couple staying there, they're only going to be allowed 1 other person to stay with them.
Or 4 kids of their own.
Correct.
Yeah.
They
So
can
you could
afford
have
that.
family.
you could have a family with as many kids as you want,
Correct.
as long as they're your adopted
related.
children.
Yeah, that's fine.
I kind of have a problem with that. I mean,
Having
but anyway,
kids.
that's
No.
not what we're talking about.
Well, I mean, again, I'm looking at it from the perspective of the neighborhood. Right. If I'm in an R1, I don't want 8 couples coming in just because there's 8 bedrooms.
Right.
Or they turn it into a bed and breakfast and go through that process, if that's really what they want to do with it. But
Yeah.
otherwise, I'm comfortable with the restriction.
So
So, I'm sorry.
should it be 3 unrelated or 3 individuals?
The 3 unrelated will allow for the family.
Correct.
Yeah, so I would.
And that's how it's written in the rest of the ordinance.
Correct.
Yeah.
Then I would stick with that unrelated.
Mr. Lowe?
I was just gonna say, I would stick with 3 individuals. We already created enough turmoil with the R1 districts by allowing Airbnbs. I don't think we should inflict them by having 10 people. I think we need to keep it consistent across the board in the city.
So you would say like the family with the.
3 people.
With 3 kids, they couldn't come if they had 3 kids? Like
I'm
to a
saying 3
three-bedroom
people, we
house.
have it written down as 3 people. I think we need to be consistent.
But that's not consistent.
Right. The housing is currently the unrelated.
That's unrelated.
If they're related, there can be more.
I think
Right.
we're making this more difficult. I think it needs to be 3.
Okay. I mean, I'm sticking
Then
with,
I'll get on my bandwagon I had at the end of our meeting last week.
All right, so you're at 3 individuals, you're at 3 unrelated,
3 unrelated.
3 unrelated,
3 unrelated.
3 unrelated.
Oh, good grief. Kenzie, I
What?
thought you were at 4.
Well, I mean,
That's better
I
than-
could go
better than
4,
just-
but I just,
Well, it doesn't matter, we're outvoted, but I would go to 4 or 6. But I definitely think you could have 2 couples. At least 2
I
couples.
know, it's just, anyway.
Well, he's at 3 individuals, so there's real no agreement anyway.
Right.
No,
Well, she said 3 unrelated, and we did.
Yeah,
I would change mine to 3
I know.
She
unrelated.
didn't yet. She
But I
has
could
not
go,
yet.
I
so-
could go with Nancy.
Oh, all right,
come with me.
Tom, I would change mine to 3 unrelated.
great, all right. So that's
There'll still be
3.
But
three
there's
people.
3, there's 3 to 2.
Are you comfortable?
Well, I mean, I think that, I don't know, I understand, I don't know, I'm so conflicted. Because it's not the trend. I mean, the doing the 3 unrelated
Just
is not,
because it's-
those aren't the people that are renting these
But just
places.
because it's a trend doesn't mean it's correct for
No,
the
it's
city.
just
of Lynchburg.
But
fun
that's-
to go on a trip with
But that's what it's-
another couple.
that's what
Instead of with
Airbnb
your
is.
spouse whom you see all the time. It's nice to go with somebody else. And if you can stay in a home with them, it's very nice to be able, you could share a bathroom, but you've got, it's just different from being in a hotel room and you're over there and you're over there and you gotta knock on doors. It's just nice. to
I think
You
the
said
problem-
y'all were good with 4? Y'all had moved up to 4?
They were considering.
Considering 4, I would say 4.
3 unrelated, 3 unrelated, 3 unrelated, 4,
Would
10.
you say 4?
Yeah, no. I would never go to 10.
All right,
And
so
I would say 4. I mean, I tend to want less restriction, but if we're, unrelated was the least.
4
restrictive of the
individuals?
mo- Yeah.
4 unrelated individuals.
Well, and you could have a family of 20 come in. I mean, there's, as long as they're related.
Well, you could have, the number doesn't change,
I
but I
kind of want a
do understand what you're
maximum
saying. If you have 2
number.
couples traveling, the thing is, I just don't want to put people in a situation who, and say this isn't possible, it's untenable to do at all. So there's a difference in short-term rental and long-term rental. And I do think that even if it had more 6 or 8, you'd probably have a better experience, as I've seen, than the people who rent something on a yearly basis. How many complaints have we had about Airbnbs versus rental units
Had 11 complaints last year.
of Airbnbs? How about long-term rentals?
Give me a minute here to, so I'll put it this way. 45% of all of our zoning violation complaints are occupancy related. I think we're somewhere in the neighborhood for probably like around, that's probably about 60 something or so of our cases in a year are occupancy related. So whatever that is, 11 out of, the 60 something.
Those are rental units.
So, 25% or 20% or something like that is probably what we're at about. I don't know, and don't quote me on that, but that's a rough number around what we're at.
One reason why I often vote against petitions is because it changes the character of the neighborhood. And that's why I'm fine with the wording as it's, the 3 unrelated, because that's going to help maintain the character of these neighborhoods.
That's
Then you
the
would
argument
rather-
I've been looking for, the wording.
3 unrelated students renting full-time than 2 couples coming for a weekend occasionally.
I was in that boat when I was in college. People would have wanted to live next door to me, so, 3 unrelated guys. And
But you never had girls spend the night.
I did.
no, I didn't. I didn't.
I ain't gonna say what happened to college.
20 years you lose your hair, Tom. Okay. 3 unrelated,
Yes, sir.
3 unrelated,
I'll say 4
4,
unrelated.
4, 4. So up to 4 individuals. Now, if they're related, can you have more than 4? Or is it just 4 individuals short term?
By definition, the 4 unrelated would actually allow a family of 5, though.
I want to be clear on what you mean. So if you're not related, you can have up to 4 people. If you are related, you can have up to 10 or 6 or whatever it is. That's what you're saying.
Are there caps on
I just need to know how to
families?
write it.
Yeah, there's no caps on families in the city anyway.
Well, there's no caps with what we're saying.
I know. Right.
So why would there be
Yeah.
with what you're saying?
Right.
No,
That's
we
what I'm
just
saying.
said-
That's what I'm
We
saying.
said 4
that-
individuals,
Yeah.
that's a cap of 4.
Okay.
Oh, I said unrelated individuals.
You said unrelated.
Right.
But if we said 4 people, 4 live bodies, then that doesn't matter.
Okay, so it's
they're
whether or not you want
related.
unrelated in there.
Yeah, well, I didn't say unrelated, but I still can't understand if you're married to somebody, it seems like you're a unit, and these 2 are married, and these 2 are married, that's more than 3 unrelated people.
Just one more thing we have to kind
Mhm.
of figure out.
But if
legislate.
2 of us are sisters, then we're okay. So, yeah.
So 3 unrelated, no more than 4 unrelated.
Right.
No more than 4 unrelated, no more than 4 unrelated.
I guess so.
Is that what I'm hearing?
That's fine. Mhm.
Okay. So, should the short-term rental occupancy be part of existing occupancy standards or in addition to? So if it's owner occupied and you have the accessory unit, are you saying you can have up to 4 unrelated people in addition to this? Or it would basically just be adding 1 on a short-term basis? I think what staff is recommending is that it be calculated with, you don't get both. You don't get an accessory unit and then get to do short-term rental. It's either or. Because then you would be taking this occupancy here, you could be taking this up to 7 down here. Really 8 with,
Yeah.
As I recall, when we discussed accessory buildings, there's more of along the line of mother-in-law houses or
correct, small.
a family member that needs medical attention.
So is everybody okay with it being calculated in the existing occupancy?
I'm not, but
So you think you should be able to have an accessory unit in your home and then do short-term rental in a R1 district?
have you been in my house?
Yes, actually.
Are
I
you in
have.
R1 then?
I'm in R2.
Right.
I'm in R2.
Big houses.
Same thing. It's a neighborhood with huge houses.
Which Garland Hill also came in and asked to downzone so they wouldn't be converted to multifamily units.
Well, what's multifamily? I mean,
They were zoned R3 and all those houses were getting
Right.
converted to
That's fine.
duplexes and apartments.
that's fine, yeah.
That's not what the rest of your neighborhood says.
No, I like R2.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I'm happy with R2. I want it to be R2.
Okay.
It's just that if I wanted, I do have an apartment in my house. And if
Get her, Kevin. Oh, you own it. That's okay.
So it's
I
not-
live there, and
it's-
and a little bit of it is an apartment
With
with.
not contradictory, the second question then, is that contradictory to the 4 unrelated for just a single Airbnb? It's not contradictory, is it?
So
It's an
basically,
additional-
the way I think we would look at it is if you're doing a short-term rental, you could have 4 unrelated people. Let's just take this unit right here. It's owner occupied in R1, RC, R1, and R2. That's what you guys said already. Down here, if it's short-term, you could have 1 additional person, right, for short-term rental. If it's long-term, you only get 3, right, which to me is whatever. Okay. What I'm asking you is, this is normal occupancy in an owner-occupied R1 district, R2 district. Do you want to be able to add 4 more in addition to these 3? Staff is strongly saying no, but I want to be, and Commissioner Marion's over there going, yes.
Why would you add them? Like you have two places to rent out or something?
Right. We just want to be clear in the
You might
ordinance.
have a basement and an apartment over your garage?
Right, we just want to be clear
I
and
would-
transparent.
Yeah, no.
Because you might have, you might actually rent, then on that weekend, rent the upstairs and your accessory, and end up having 8 people.
No, the
You know.
accessory is already long-term rental, that's all. I'm
I mean,
not
somebody
saying-
could, if you're,
I'm not saying you can rent two short-term rentals at one time.
Okay,
I'm
so we're saying the same
If I
thing.
already
Yeah, yeah,
have
it's-
an
right.
apartment and it's been rented for 10 years, as it has
Right.
been, and then all my kids have moved out and I have 3 spare bedrooms, if I wanted to make a little money and rent out my couple of bedrooms, they're gonna be in my house, they're gonna use my kitchen and, everything, they're gonna be right there with me, but, why can't I do it?
While you're occupying while the apartment is occupied?
Well, that doesn't have anything to do with it, that's
Sure it
another
does.
section of the house.
That's what she's saying.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what you're
I
saying.
mean, that's the way I live now, in a big house with an apartment and a bunch of extra rooms. But my neighbor who doesn't rent out an apartment can rent as much as they want. But,
It's tricky.
I mean, I've actually thought about Airbnb or, renting.
Right, and the ordinance wouldn't say that you couldn't do it, it's just saying that, so what
You're saying I couldn't, the way you're talking about.
what you're arguing is that you're basically taking an R1 dwelling and turning it into a triplex.
Well,
That's exactly what
Okay.
you're talking about doing, an R1 or R2 dwelling, turning it into a triplex. And that's fine if that's what you want to do, but I think that is not right for the low-density areas in the city.
okay.
That's my opinion. But
Right.
what matters is what's your opinion.
I agree with you, Lou. I think it is in conflict with the spirit of the short-term rentals.
Commissioner Pearl.
So I agree as well with staff.
I agree.
I agree.
You don't agree.
Oh, well, I think you're right in 99% of the cases. I think there are exceptions, but I'll,
Calculated what?
that's all. I think there are exceptions. Not many.
All right, parking. So, right now, you have to have 1 parking space per dwelling unit. If you add an accessory dwelling unit, so like your apartment, so technically you should have 2 parking spaces. All right? So what we're asking is if you do a short-term rental, should you have to have a parking space dedicated for that short-term rental use?
That includes on-street.
It
That could be
includes
on-street.
on-street also, yes, if it's within 1,000 feet, connected by sidewalk.
Amenable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Parking,
The rest is easy.
that was an easy one. I like easy. Okay. So, currently, city staff has no way of identifying short-term rental units. Why is this fun? That's the truth, right? All right, so, what we have is, I guess, by the nice, they're probably trying to sell us the monitoring thing, right? But they provided us this map. Didn't tell us where they were, but there's just this map with a bunch of dots on it. So registration would allow the city to identify and monitor where these short-term rental units are. The registration fee of $150 would offset the vendor and staff cost involved. The $150 registration fee is based on the equivalent of a 30-day stay times a typical $75 a night stay times 6.5% lodging tax. That comes out roughly to $150. Should registration be required for short-term rental, and should a registration fee be charged?
So let me ask you this. Talking about Blacksburg, having done that platform, one of the things that's nice about that is the purchaser pays the tax. In this situation, then, it's harder to pass that along to the renter, although renters don't mind seeing tax on their bill. But if they did something like an Airbnb, could have a lower registration and pass those taxes directly on. Just a question. I don't know why we haven't
But
kind
they
of.
could, if they're so concerned about the $150 fee, instead of charging $75 a night, they could charge $72 a night, right?
No, 78.
Whatever,
Yeah.
78,
Add more money.
right? What,
He's a planner, not an accountant.
we big deal in round numbers. Okay, so let's, just for sake of discussion, let's talk about why city staff did not suggest a lodging tax, even though I believe 17 of the localities that we looked at all did it. So the current proposal is not to charge a lodging tax. There's no accurate way, even if we get the host compliance, there's no accurate way to know the number of nights it's rented or the price, okay? And what you heard last time is not all the platforms out there will remit the lodging tax. I believe Airbnb will, but like Vacations by Owner and those places will not, okay? So that's why we just said, okay, let's base it on 30 nights at $75 a night times 6.5%.
So then if they, I mean, it would be, I think technically illegal for them then to charge the customer and say, here's your 6.5% lodging tax on your bill, because I don't think you can charge tax.
Well, they would just be charging, what they'd
Would
be
you just
doing
do a
is,
service fee or?
they don't have to call it anything. Instead of their room rate, if they're so concerned about $150 registration, instead of charging $75, they would charge $78. They would recoup their $150. So Mitch is here. He's prepared to tell you what would be involved in trying to go out and audit these 365, or if it increases to 500, what would be involved in auditing to collect lodging taxes on that, right?
Right.
So you want to tell them then?
Well, I mean, obviously, when you, as I've told several folks, a lot of these individuals are really not looking at the income they're earning as income, even though it is. But they're not going to report it as income. They're just trying to make some extra money off renting out a room in a house. So they're not reporting it as income. If we were able to conduct an audit, there's just no way for us to get a legitimate number for what's occurring at these establishments. It's very difficult to know who they are in the first place. Now, if we use this documents, we'll be able to find it. And a lot of people, when you start going after them, tell them the registration fee, they're going to stop doing it. But then they might not stop doing it. They may be still doing it. And these are just things we're going to be faced with if we try to charge the lodging tax. Currently we have about 400 businesses that remit meals, lodging, and amusement. And we have difficulties with about 20 businesses every single month in making sure they remit. I mean, we have to send them letters, and we have to summons them to the office, and eventually we usually have to levy an assessment, which we really don't want to do. We want everybody to remit what they've collected. With these folks, we're talking about close to 400, so we're going to have at least 350 operators out there, and if we can identify them, and if we can get the information to them, we're relying on them to remit to us every month what they've collected. And if they're not looking at themselves as a business, we already have 400 that know they're a business and we have some difficulties. Imagine what we're going to be facing with these 350 folks. It's going to be, I'd say, up to 50% will not remit, and will be involved in this game of trying to get them to remit what they should have. And a lot of them may not do any business in a given month, but we can't know that on the front end. That has to be told to us. And a lot of the folks that have the lodging tax, I've contacted almost all of these. Now, out of the 17, 5 of these entities, 5 localities have fewer than 5 Airbnbs. So, my next question was, well, how many do you think you have out there that are not reported? None. I'm like, well, they're saying we have 350 rental units in Lynchburg. I mean, this is Norfolk. You've got 5 Airbnbs in Norfolk? I mean, it's just not reasonable. Yes, they charge the lodging tax, but it's more on a volunteer basis. And the reason why it's like that is because they don't have the staff. They do not have the labor to enforce it the way it needs to be enforced. And in my opinion, and I love the interaction between you folks, because I agree with y'all. If we are gonna do it, we need to treat everybody the same. And we need, unfortunately, that's my left-hand column, is how many FTEs. And out of the ones that are really doing a decent job with this, they say you'll need at least one additional person just to monitor the Airbnb activity. So, and another piece out there is for Airbnb to collect it. And like I've discussed with several folks, you know, it's a new economy, and it's things are done differently today, and they'll be done differently tomorrow. And I think that's an option that needs to be on the table, is a possibility of Airbnb collecting it. Now, but what did I just say? I want to treat everybody the same, and Tom's exactly right. Airbnb is willing to do this, but there's no background information, there's no audit tool for localities. You're going to get what you get. I call it pennies from heaven. But these other folks are not necessarily, well, they won't. I mean, I haven't identified any of the other organizations that provide the temporary stays that are willing to collect it and remit it to the locality.
How does Blacksburg, do they enforce people must use Airbnb? How do they?
No,
So-
but they
so-
are in an agreement with Airbnb.
Yeah, so then the rest of it's kind of voluntary.
It
They
is.
only collected 16,000, I think, last year.
And just real quickly, like Bedford County, I contacted Bedford County, and they have about 400 units that are short-term rentals. 350 of them are through management companies. So Bedford County's in a little different ballpark. 350 is sort of taken care of with the activity at the lake, and they have to identify the 50. Virginia Beach, the same way, they have 1,400 rental units. 1,200 of them are managed through rental companies. So they're only really having to focus on 200. Unfortunately, here in Lynchburg, we have the entities that are attracting the short-term rental. We just don't have the management companies really managing the majority of them. And that, we're just in a different world than some of the other folks.
And Commissioner Rogers, they do have a registration program. So they run a registration program and a collection agreement. They don't charge a registration fee. And so I think what Mr. Martin's proposed to you is really three questions. Should we run a registration program that allows us to identify the location? Second is there a registration fee? We've given you our recommendation that covers staff costs, but you can deviate from that in any way you choose in your recommendation to council. And then the third piece is the lodging tax, and we've given you our opinion on all three of those. So.
Yes, yes, and no.
Can you show the questions again? There's the.
Should there be a registration?
Yes.
Yes.
I agree, definitely.
Should there be a fee?
Yes.
Yes, I think we talked a little bit last time about this being a little high comparatively with other localities, maybe?
Yeah, the other localities are also charging the lodging tax, which this ordinance would not do.
Okay, and you're not willing to let Airbnb collect just to see what you get?
I'm not the one doing it.
Right, we'll take your recommendation. The concern with doing the voluntary collection agreement is the inability to audit. But as you just heard Mr. Knuckles say, we're not taking anything off the table. We want to hear your thoughts on this. The $150 registration fee covers our existing staff costs. Anything else, we start to get into subsidization of the program. And we'll just have to figure out how that works, and council would ultimately make that call.
So collecting from Airbnb, would that be a lot more work for you?
Oh, no, I mean, that's pennies from heaven.
Okay.
We just can't audit it. We don't know if it's
And
correct.
then, all right, so put that aside. I mean, just assuming that you're not auditing and you're just accepting what you get. Is that something that you would like to do, or do you think that it would just, you would rather treat everybody the same and not?
That's one of the problems with that, is that Airbnb is the only platform
Right.
that's willing to do that.
Right.
So you have several others out there, and they would not be remitting the tax.
Right.
Now, for people in my world that believe in fairness and equity, even though a lot of people don't think it's fair, but, you want to treat everybody the same. And if somebody has to remit it, you want the other person to have to remit it. So that's not happening. And then Airbnb is also not giving the locality any information about where the money
Is coming from?
is coming from.
Right,
It
gotcha.
just happens.
Right.
So for me, I mean, with that approach, there's no additional workload, but there are issues with it because you really aren't creating an equitable
Gotcha. Okay.
My question with this is, and I do think there are people, and I've talked to people who are actually, I'd rather pay the $150 fee than collect tax and remit it. And they actually would rent their house out for more money and for more days. But what about then the people who don't do it very often, like 3 or 4 times, and they're like, well, shoot, it's not even worth it. So then the other, or would they be more willing, have more people willing to pay a lower fee, and actually just get a larger pool of people doing that? We never know how things change. I would say one thing about Airbnb is I would assume, while we can't audit, I would assume they're pretty tight with their books and the way they do things. I think they probably have a really good system, because like you said, that platform industry is pretty well done. So I don't think there's going to be a lot hidden there. But at this point, if no one else is doing it, everybody else is
But
voluntary.
you don't know
Right.
if it's hidden or not, for one thing. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like
And-
saying,
yeah.
okay, we're going to hire a third party to collect the city's real estate taxes, but they're not going to tell us how much taxable property we have, and they're not going to tell us how much they collected. They're just going to give us X amount of dollars, and we need to run on our merry way and do what we can do with it. That's exactly what Airbnb is doing. So I think in response to your comment about, well, if somebody's only doing it 4 times a night, 4 times a year,
Yeah.
is $150 too high? Maybe so, but they have the opportunity to do it more, right? So, and
Right.
to say we're going to lower the fee, so maybe more people, so instead of having 365 Airbnbs, maybe we'll have 600. I'm not sure how equitable that is.
Yeah.
So staff believes that the $150 registration fee is the fairest way of doing the registration.
What do you guys think?
I think by having a number like that, it's people who are serious about doing it.
We'll do.
I'm not going to do it just for a graduation weekend,
Right.
but I would be willing to pay that fee if I was doing it over multiple weekends. So it would make me think twice about whether or not I do want to do a short-term rental on my house, and I think that's a good thing.
Right. But it's also true that a lot of people don't count this as income. They're pocket the cash, which
I mean, you
not
would,
a
That's
not
part
very
of the reason
fair.
we're having this conversation.
yeah. And if you only did it on one weekend a year and it was a popular weekend, you can charge a lot of money.
You can make $800-900
You definitely
bucks, yeah.
recoup that $150, depending on the
Right.
weekend.
How quickly would you be able to, let's say graduation was coming up and I thought, I'm going to rent my house out and I want to do this, I'm going to do it graduation and homecoming. How quickly could you enact something like this, the registration? There's something you would want to actually have done, be able to do online within a day or something like that? Flexibility of,
Yeah. that's
not a
straightforward.
long-term.
Our current recommendation is that we would implement this July 1, and we would just run it, the city's fiscal year runs July 1 to June 30th, so we would enact it based on that. Now, obviously, depending on what the recommendations are, we may need more of a grace period, we may need a lot. I will tell you that by the time we communicate out and set up our billing system, that's probably at least 3 months.
But somebody could go online and do
Yeah.
it, and then rent it out 3 days later.
Yeah.
Like, they could go online and register, after you implement it July 1st.
Sure.
They could go on July 15th and then rent it out July 30th, because they can pay for it and register online.
Absolutely.
Nancy?
I wish that all of them were like Airbnb and would collect the tax, because I think that would be the most equitable, but since that's not the case, and I certainly don't want you trying to go after all these Airbnbs and collect, nickels and dimes from them yourself every month, so that's out of the question. So it would have to be a fee, and I wonder too if the 150 is a little high, because it's not equitable for those who don't rent it but 2 or 3 times a year. So I would expect that those people who just want to rent out for graduation and homecoming are going to just do it anyway and not register and hope they don't get caught. So, but those who are serious about it and are going to be renting out a lot are not going to run that risk because they know their neighbors are going to rat them out. And they, I mean, especially if there's any trouble, they will pay it. So I think the 150 is probably as good as anything. I mean, I wouldn't mind $100, but I don't think it's going to make too much difference one way or the other. If you can rent your place for $75 a night, rent it 2 nights, and you've made your 150. So after that, you can make some money. So I'd be okay with the fee. It's just like Uber and Lyft, you know. This is a whole new economy, and you know, with those, it's so easy. You pay online, and you never have to, you know, have
Yeah.
any cash, tips, anything.
You're absolutely right. It's a new economy, and unfortunately, local governments are expected and have to provide the same level of service without the same levels of revenue.
Right.
The environment that's being created puts localities at a severe disadvantage, both by these platforms and, I'll say it, the General Assembly in Richmond, right? Because they're telling us you have to do this, and now they're going to dictate how many days you can do it, and this and that. But other than that, so you're okay with the $150 fee for you? You.
I haven't even spoken yet, Tom.
So he just asked if I was, yeah. Oh, that's fine.
Are you okay with a $150 fee?
Yes, I'm okay with the $100 fee. In fact, I actually have a question. Maybe we should.
150.
150.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm not sure if that is enough, because you made the comment, we're going to need at least 1 FTE.
But not if we do the $150 fee. We will not.
Well,
That covers-
we still have this thing called enforcement. If we go back to my old tirade I made at the end of our last meeting there, enforcement. Who's going to go out and address? Kevin, you're a busy man. Go out and address these things, and if we're adopting this and the building codes, there's a lot in there, so I'm just concerned that we have enough money to fund what we're asking to do.
Commissioner Lowe, I'll say, council, as part of their direction, the consensus was that we try to do this with existing staff. So this covers existing staff resources.
Okay.
But the trade-off with that is we will not be proactively enforcing building code. We will not be walking into these units. We will not be doing those.
Unfortunately, I recognize
Okay.
that reality.
I just, it's
that's,
important to say
that's
that.
the
And if
problem
that's
that
part
we-
of your recommendation, then we need to be clear on that.
Yeah.
But that's not part of the ordinance as proposed.
I'm just concerned that we're going to be reacting to complaints.
That changes my mind a little bit. You're not going to be enforcing building codes, which is, we haven't even gotten to that.
That's
little thing
not
yet.
what he said. I mean,
Oh, I mean, you're not going to be,
We won't be inspecting the units. We will not be
Right.
inspecting.
But you're
it.
not going to be inspected either.
But I do want to, let me just clarify. We always inspect units. We can inspect them on a complaint basis. We will not be proactively inspecting
Right.
units. Let's make sure of that.
Well, based on the numbers of identified units, you're looking at $55,000 a year of revenue,
That's right.
which is probably not enough for a full-time position with benefits and everything, so, but that's not, I don't think that's the point, but it is,
a portion of that will go to pay the host compliance.
yeah, right.
And
The host compliance.
And I probably need to say this now, we have not selected a vendor. I've received a couple of emails saying that we've already gone with them. This is the vendor who just happened to give us this assessment. There are multiple vendors out there, and our intent is to shop this a little bit, so.
And I would argue, just like with a lot of these other things, the complaints and violations are probably going to be less for short-term rentals than for long-term rentals, just because of the nature of the business. It's, a lot of that's self-policed with the online evals.
Okay. So it's 150 to here. Are you okay with the 150?
I can live with 150.
All right, so registration fee, okay. So so are you okay with not doing the lodging tax? Okay,
I mean, Tom, so this can, something that can change with time, right? So,
Absolutely.
I mean, could you envision something where they actually do get a business license tax and then maybe all platforms will be doing this one time, remitting tax? I mean, that's something that might happen.
Certainly,
Yeah.
but with the business license tax, just keep in mind that now in the city of Lynchburg, $10,000 and less in gross receipts, there is no business license. So it would take, quite a few rentals
Right.
for these folks to get over the $10,000 limit. Which in a sense is a good thing, because these folks, you have a lot coming in and you have a lot going out. So I mean, it's a lot of adding and deleting, so it's really a good thing that it wouldn't kick in till they exceed 10, because they're the ones that are really gonna be at play.
so it sounds like no to the lodging tax. All right, so Commission has said, yep, need to have a registration, said $150 is the number. What staff is proposing is there needs to be some type of incentive for people to actually register. So what the ordinance is saying is that if you fail to register, if we get your name on this list and you haven't registered in that year period, there's going to be a $500 penalty assessed.
If we find out you actually.
If we find out you did it and we can document it, there'd be a $500 penalty.
So that would take care of the complaints to people that are running Airbnb without registering.
They probably stop.
What about if, to be less negative, we found out about you, if you don't pay the 150 within 7 days, then you're gonna be fined $500
Yeah.
to give them a chance to become
Yeah, it'll be
compliant.
something along those
That'll
lines.
be a grace period.
Yeah, there's definitely a grace period associated with these things, but we'll be doing the registration in advance. So in other words, we'll be sending you a bill and there will be a piece.
Right,
that
but later
can-
on, you talk about a 3-strike penalty, and so,
Yeah, oh, great.
Actually, sold them, it was 1,000, so.
Yeah, my concern is that we know we're gonna have people going underground with this business. Okay, so I'm not fine with them writing a $150 check when they get tagged. Hey, you were running Airbnb. You don't get a 7-day grace period to do it. You've been running a business underground. Tag, we got you. I think they need to pay $500.
I'm a little worried about, maybe they just did it one time and their neighbor got mad and for some reason, because I think they should pay more than 150. If I'm late paying my taxes, I gotta pay a penalty and interest, and I think there should be a penalty for not doing it, but
I think the
500.
state code sets the $500.
It's up to.
Up to $500.
So you've got discretion.
You have
can set-
discretion, yeah.
I mean, I might have just done it once, and that's all I'm
Or I think
gonna
it just
do
says
it.
penalties.
And I was hoping I could get away with it, but
They've had to modify that. They adopted that before the General Assembly set the seal. So they've modified it
I was like, that's steep.
to 500.
1,000.
I mean, I'm still fine with a grace period. If someone does it one weekend and they get caught, give them the chance to become official. And if they don't, then fine them the $500. But that's not a make or break for me.
I like the grace period.
But we're putting out in public that we're doing this. Correct?
No, it's
We're
pretty public
advertising.
today, yeah. It's pretty public, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't see why we need to do a grace period. I'm sorry. It's gonna be out there in the news, it'll be in the newspaper. So that everyone knows that if you're gonna run an Airbnb out of your house, you need to register. And we find out you're running one, I don't see where we need to do a grace period.
So I think we're probably getting a little away from the code and a little more into the implementation of the code. I think what we're asking is, what's the implementation? Should there be a penalty if you don't register? And if so, what should that penalty be?
That's correct.
Yep.
So it sounds like everybody's okay with there being a penalty.
Yeah.
It's $500 the amount.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yes.
Okay. Great. All right, so we've talked about a little bit about the building codes. Should short-term rental units have to comply with applicable building codes?
Yes.
Answer is, yeah, they're gonna have to anyway, but, okay. Building code is yes. Last thing, should the ordinance provide for revoking approval of short-term rental if 3 violations related to the short-term rental occur? So if on 3 occasions, the city gets complaints of noise or trash that's related to that short-term rental, should the city be able to come in and revoke the approval for it?
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes,
And that's a permanent thing.
that's
No going back.
done, yep.
And that it's not just, okay, 3 violations, yeah.
No,
If some-
related to the short term.
Yeah, it's not, if somebody calls the law on you because
like
they
3
don't like you, it's not complaints, it's violations. So
It's
they
violations,
found
and
it.
they have to
They're
be
found it.
documented,
Yeah.
found it violation.
Sure.
Is everybody in agreement with that?
Yes.
All right, so that was the entire ordinance in a nutshell. Now, that being said, I know you said it's not a public hearing, but you had a lot of people that sat through this back there. I don't know if the commission wants to acknowledge them or whatever, but it was a long meeting. But anyway, staff appreciates your, you got one more thing?
Well, I did have a suggestion that I should have mentioned it earlier. Do you think it would be a good thing to require the host, and again, this is in some of my readings, there are places that required hosts to have, I mean, I guess when they register, maybe there's a list of requirements or something, and, you know, they're required to have smoke detectors, they're required to have carbon monoxide detectors, fire extinguishers, they're supposed to provide contact information and emergency information about parking, the noise restrictions and trash collections.
So, yeah, we could absolutely put that in under the.
I just think that could help with some of these neighborhoods that are very worried and upset about there being an Airbnb in their neighborhood. So having that kind of part of the ordinance or part of the registration process, it could make, anyway, that's all.
Yeah, I think we could definitely make that part of the registration process. I'm not sure it would need to be in the ordinance, but,
Okay.
Very good point. Refrigerator stuff. All right.
Well, this isn't a public hearing, and I wish we had time to have everybody speak. We've heard a lot of people speak on this, and, one of the things that, this will go to city council, and that's where I think a lot of people get involved. There's no perfect framework, I think, that we can do on this, although it's definitely something, there's some necessary measures you have to take to have legal use, and I think it's important that we're doing that. So I'd really encourage you all to continue sending your letters and go to the city council meeting and be heard there as well. So I really appreciate you all coming. So if, is there any other business to attend to? All right, well, everybody make a motion to,
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
all right, a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
The next meeting is
Aye.
canceled. The second one in February.
Was that sufficient?
Back here on
excellent.
March 13th.
Got our money's worth out of you today.
Yeah.